I want you to picture a highly specific, but honestly universally recognized ritual.
Oh, I think I know exactly where this is going.
Right, so it's Friday afternoon, the office is finally getting quiet, the Slack notifications have, slowed to a trickle.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, exactly. Or, I mean, maybe you work from home, and the late afternoon sun is just starting to cast those long shadows across your desk.
Setting the scene. I like it.
So you open up a new browser tab, you navigate to your company's HR portal, and you click on the time tracking section.
Ah, yes. The dreaded timesheet.
And then with the practiced precision of a concert pianist, you enter a sequence of numbers that honestly borders on magical realism.
It really is a work of fiction.
It is.
Yeah.
You type in 8 hours of work, exactly 30 minutes for a lunch break, and you log that uniform, pristine, mathematically flawless sequence for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Right across the board.
You hit submit and you close the tab. But, I mean, you and I both know the reality of your week was absolutely nothing like that.
Not even close.
On Tuesday, a massive server went down, or maybe a critical client account went into crisis mode.
Oh, yeah. Full panic mode.
Right. And you were at your desk for 12 hours straight.
Yeah.
You survived on cold coffee, sheer adrenaline, and like a panic-induced flow state.
I've all been there.
And then, on Thursday, the exact inverse happened. You finished your actual tangible tasks by, 2:00 p.m.?
That sounds about right.
But because you had to remain quote-unquote available, you spent the next 3 hours staring at a blinking cursor.
Just aggressively moving your mouse every 5 minutes so your status wouldn't turn to away.
Exactly. We all do the mouse jiggle.
Oh.
But the timesheet does not care about the server fire, and it doesn't care about the blinking cursor either.
No, the timesheet has one story and one story only.
The timesheet says 8 hours, 30-minute break. It is a daily, universally accepted, slightly absurd, modern lie.
It really is the ultimate open secret of the modern working world.
And everyone knows it's a lie. You, your manager, the HR department, the executive board, yet we all just quietly agree to participate in this grand piece of performance art.
We are all engaged in meticulously documenting a reality that simply doesn't exist, largely because, the alternative documenting the messy truth would completely break the systems we've built.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today we are going deep into the mechanics of this exact lie.
And it goes so much deeper than just an annoying HR portal.
It really does. We're going to explore the massive, often hilarious, but honestly deeply stressful tension between rigid labor laws and the chaotic reality of how work actually gets done today.
Right, in the real 21st century.
We are diving into rulings from the European Court of Justice, the grueling daily realities of nursing wards, the culture of modern IT startups, and get this, we're even going to connect this daily timesheet ritual to the psychology of day trading and post-World War II macroeconomic policy.
It's a vast landscape we are covering today.
That's huge. But it all ties together, right?
It does. It all basically orbits around one fundamental mismatch in eras. The core issue here is that modern society is desperately trying to force modern knowledge work and complex care work into a rigid 19th century factory mold.
Like jamming a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. We are using tools designed for assembly lines to govern people who are writing abstract software architecture or saving lives in emergency rooms. And the psychological and economic side effects of this are profound.
Let's start right there at that baseline tension between the legal fiction we type into the HR portal and the reality people actually live every day.
Okay, let's lay out the rules.
Yeah. If we look at the standard labor laws governing most developed economies, especially in Europe based on our sources, what is the actual legal baseline we are supposed to be adhering to?
So the baseline working time laws are obsessively focused on strict daily limits. The golden rule, which was historically hard-fought and is culturally enshrined, is the 8-hour workday.
Right, the classic 9 to 5.
Exactly. Now, legally, you can sometimes extend that to 10 hours, but only under the strict condition that it averages back out to 8 hours over a 6-month period.
So it's a very rigid mathematical equation.
Highly rigid. And then there's the absolute holy grail of this legislation, which is the mandatory 11-hour uninterrupted rest period.
Meaning, once you clock out, you are legally done.
Once you clock out, the law dictates that 11 full hours must pass before you can legally work a single minute again.
Which, I mean, on a purely intuitive level, that sounds fantastic. 11 hours to sleep, eat, see your family, and decompress. It sounds deeply humane.
On paper, it is incredibly humane.
But when you apply that rigid rule to the actual physical world, the contradictions become stark. Like, think about heavy infrastructure.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Imagine a construction crew laying new train tracks on a major commuter line.
Right.
They only have a specific window at night to do this without paralyzing the entire city's transport network.
Right, you can't just stop the trains during rush hour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't just hit the 10-hour mark, blow a whistle, and say, all right, folks, leave the rails unbolted. We've hit our legal limit. Enjoy your 11 hours of rest.
Because the commuter train is coming in 4 hours.
The rails have to be bolted. The train will derail.
Precisely. The physical reality of the task does not care about the arbitrary legal limit. The law says stop, but reality says finish the job.
Or, even more critically, think about a nurse. You're on a chronically understaffed ward. You're at the very end of your shift. You're exhausted. But a patient suddenly crashes.
Literal life or death situation.
Right. And to make matters worse, the relief nurse who is supposed to take over your rotation just called to say they're stuck in gridlock traffic and won't be there for another hour.
It happens all the time.
The rigid law says you have reached your maximum hours. You must go home immediately to begin your 11-hour rest.
Yeah.
But the human, practical, and moral reality says you absolutely cannot leave that patient.
You'd never just walk away from a crashing patient because your timesheet says so.
Right. So what actually happens in these situations?
What's fascinating here is how the legal system attempts to cope with these exact contradictions. The law isn't entirely blind, It has built-in mechanisms that we can think of as legal valves to release this pressure.
Legal valves, okay?
Yeah, so those 14-hour shifts do happen legally, but only through incredibly narrow, highly bureaucratic channels.
It's a lot of red tape.
Tons of it. For example, you have union collective agreements, which can allow for longer hours if a significant portion of the job is classified as on-call time.
Like in a firehouse or an emergency room.
Exactly. They use that heavily. You also have emergency exceptions for completely unforeseeable disasters, like a massive flood or a citywide blackout.
Okay, that makes sense.
And lastly, you have special official permits. So that railway company laying those tracks, they can petition a regulatory body months in advance to get a specific exemption for that nighttime work, proving it's in the overwhelming public interest.
Wait, let me stop you at the emergency exceptions part. Because if a nurse is staying late because the ward is short-staffed, that sounds like a textbook emergency to me. Does that trigger the legal valve?
And this is where the bureaucracy really shows its teeth. Legally speaking, chronic understaffing in a hospital does not count as an emergency.
Are you serious?
Entirely serious. In the eyes of the law, an emergency must be an acute, unforeseeable event.
Unforeseeable being the key word.
Right. An earthquake is an emergency. A multi-car pileup is an emergency. But if a hospital management board has failed to hire enough nurses and the ward has been understaffed every single day for 3 years.
Oh, wow. So it's treated as a systemic failure, not an emergency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is a known structural reality. Therefore, it absolutely does not qualify for the emergency exception.
That is just mind-boggling. So without a highly specific pre-negotiated union agreement or a special government permit, that nurse pulling the 14-hour shift to keep a crashing patient alive is actually operating in an illegal gray area.
Yes, they are.
They are doing the absolutely necessary work to keep society functioning, and the law considers them in violation.
That's the paradox. The work is biologically and practically necessary, but legally it's an infraction. And this immense friction has naturally sparked a massive reform debate.
I would hope so.
Oh yeah, there is a strong push among certain economists and industry leaders to move away from this rigid daily limit and instead look at working time on a weekly basis.
Right, shifting the focus from the micro day-to-day level to the macro weekly level.
Correct. So the proposed reform, which actually aligns with broader European Union directives on working time, suggests implementing a 48-hour weekly maximum instead of a strict daily cap.
Okay, how would that play out in reality?
Well, under this model, you could theoretically work a 13 or 14-hour day during a crunch period, provided you still receive your required rest periods, and you balance those intense days with significantly shorter days later in the week.
Just to ensure you don't breach the 48-hour total.
Exactly. It's about averaging it out over a shorter, more relevant time frame.
And from a project management perspective, that makes total sense. It matches the natural rhythm of how work actually ebbs and flows.
Yes, the organic demands of the task.
Like if you are pouring a massive concrete foundation, You are entirely dependent on a weather window. When it's dry, you have to go. You work 12 hours because it might rain for the next 3 days.
You can't just stop the concrete from drying because you hit 8 hours?
Exactly. Or, if you're a software team pushing a major release, you have a natural sprint. Supporters of this weekly model argue we should let adults align their hours with the organic demands of the task.
However, the critics of this reform are deeply fundamentally terrified of it. And to be fair, their fears are not completely unfounded.
What are they so afraid of?
They argue that dissolving the daily limit softens a crucial psychological and physical barrier. They view it as a slippery slope, where employers will weaponize this quote-unquote flexibility to institutionalize exhaustion.
Oh, I see. They think it'll just become the new normal to work 14-hour days all the time.
Right. And they argue that leads directly to higher burnout rates, more workplace accidents, and the total erosion of the boundary between work and personal life.
So you have this total stalemate. Industry saying we need flexibility to match reality, and labor advocates saying flexibility is just a Trojan horse for exploitation.
A complete gridlock.
But then, something happened recently that basically threw a hand grenade into this whole stalemate.
A massive hand grenade. In 2019, the European Court of Justice delivered a landmark, sweeping ruling on time tracking.
And they didn't just uphold the old laws, did they?
No, they doubled down on them, hard. The court mandated that every single employer must install an objective, reliable, and accessible system to systematically record the daily working hours of every single employee.
Wait, every employee. So not just hourly shift workers, but salaried managers, creative directors, software engineers.
Everyone. You can no longer just trust salaried employees to manage their own time and deliver results. You have to prove mathematically to the minute that they are complying with the daily limits and the 11-hour rest periods.
You know, when I first grasped the scale of that ruling for the sources, I immediately thought of traffic laws.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, it feels exactly like the state looking at the entire highway system and saying, we have determined that driving over 65 miles per hour is dangerous. Therefore, nobody can drive over 65 under any circumstances, ever.
Regardless of context.
Right. And it doesn't matter if you are a professional Formula One driver sitting in a perfectly engineered $1 million vehicle on a completely closed, dry, empty track on a sunny day.
The state still says 65.
Exactly. The state says the speed limit is 65 because we have to design the law for the exhausted teenager driving a rusted-out minivan in a snowstorm. The law caters to the lowest common denominator of safety and forces everyone else to artificially restrict their capability to match it.
That is a brilliant analogy. The law functions as a blanket ordinance of public protection. It simply cannot account for context or skill or environment.
It's totally blind to all of that.
It is. But when you apply that blanket ordinance to the modern corporate environment, it leads directly to a phenomenon that organizational psychologists call compliance theater.
Compliance theater. Okay, let's dissect that, because this came up so much in the reading. What does compliance theater actually look like on the ground inside a company?
It looks exactly like the ritual we described at the start of our deep dive. The actual practical work processes of the company systematically undermine the state regulations, but they do it through administrative fictions.
You mean they just lie on paper?
Yes.
Yeah.
Companies don't want to get fined, obviously, but they also know their business will literally collapse if they actually force everyone to drop their tools at the 8-hour mark.
Right.
So they purchase expensive, automated time-tracking software. And what does this software actually do? It often just pre-fills the hours. Or employees learn very quickly to simply log exactly 8.5 hours every single day, regardless of whether they worked 4 hours or 14 hours.
So the system isn't measuring reality at all.
Not even slightly. It is no longer measuring real economic output. It is not tracking creativity or problem solving or the monumental effort it took to fix that server fire.
It's just a compliance engine.
Exactly. It is exclusively measuring legal compliance.
That is so deeply cynical.
Yeah.
We're spending millions of dollars on enterprise software ecosystems, not to gain actual insights into how our businesses operate, but simply to generate a perfectly boring, legally pristine database.
Just for show.
So if a government labor inspector ever shows up, we can hand them a spreadsheet that says, look, 8.5 hours across the board, nothing to see here, everyone is perfectly rested.
Exactly. Compliance theater doesn't change how the work actually gets done. People still work the 14-hour days when things break. It only changes how much time and energy we spend lying about how the work gets done.
Which raises a massive historical question for me. Why on earth did the European Court of Justice mandate this in 2019? Where did this ruling even come from?
The origin story is wild.
Because on the surface, it feels like the ultimate dystopian corporate micromanagement, like a hyper-capitalist quat to track our every bathroom break. But that's not the origin story at all, is it?
No, and this is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of this entire debate. If you look at the legal history of the 2019 ECJ ruling, it wasn't pushed by corporate overlords wanting to squeeze more productivity out of workers.
Who was it then?
The lawsuit that triggered this was actually brought forward by a Spanish labor union, the CCOO, and they were suing Deutsche Bank in Spain.
Wait. A labor union fought tooth and nail to legally force companies to track every single minute of their workers' lives. That feels so backwards.
Yes. They believed they were protecting the workers from unpaid overtime. But their legal strategy was born out of a very specific, deeply paternalistic philosophy of protectionism.
Okay.
It is entirely rooted in a 19th century industrial assembly line mindset.
Okay, we need to break that down. When we say a 19th century mindset, what are we actually talking about here?
We are talking about Taylorism. Frederick Winslow Taylor was a mechanical engineer who, in the late 1880s and 1890s, pioneered what he called scientific management.
He's the guy with the stopwatch, right?
Yes, exactly. Taylor famously stood in steel mills with a literal stopwatch, timing every single micro-movement a worker made while shoveling coal or moving pig iron.
Just treating people like robots.
Basically. His foundational belief was that the worker was essentially a cog in a machine, inherently lazy and needed to be optimized by management. Under Taylorism, the employer is structurally the exploiter, the employee is the helpless physical laborer, and most importantly, input automatically equals output.
Meaning time equals value.
Exactly. If you are stamping metal car doors on an assembly line, the math is linear and undeniable. 1 hour of your physical presence equals 50 car doors. 10 hours of your presence equals 500 car doors.
So time is literally materialized into value.
Yes, it's a direct correlation.
And if you apply that logic to a factory in 1910, it works. The union protecting those workers absolutely should care about time, because time is the exact metric of their physical depletion.
It makes perfect sense in that context.
But if we try to apply that Taylorist stopwatch to modern disciplines, the logic just completely vaporizes.
It shatters on impact. To understand why, let's look at how different modern disciplines view this obsession with time tracking. Let's start with economics.
Okay.
If you talk to any modern labor economist, they will tell you that pure working time is a completely useless metric for evaluating knowledge work.
Because knowledge work is nonlinear.
Exactly. Let's take the software developer from our earlier example. If you force an overtired developer to keep coding into their 12th hour, they are not producing positive economic value.
They're probably just making a mess.
Yes. In fact, their productivity goes negative. They are highly likely to write deeply flawed code bugs that might take the entire engineering team 5 days to track down and fix next week.
So that extra hour actually cost the company a week of productivity.
Precisely. Conversely, in knowledge work, a breakthrough doesn't always happen at the keyboard. Sometimes 0 hours of typing and 1 hour of taking a walk in the woods produces the architectural solution that saves the company millions.
You cannot measure a walk in the woods with a Taylorist stopwatch.
You really can't.
Okay, so economists hate it. What about the medical and psychological fields? Because you would assume that doctors are fully on board with strict limits on working hours.
Medicine and psychology actually have a fascinating internal conflict over this. From a purely physiological standpoint, cardiovascular medicine absolutely agrees with the law.
Right, because exhaustion is bad for the body.
Exactly. Chronic 12 or 14-hour shifts are objectively terrible for your heart, your blood pressure, and they dramatically increase the risk of physical accident.
Right, nobody wants an exhausted surgeon operating on them.
Nobody. But organizational psychology introduces a massive caveat that the law completely ignores: the concept of autonomy. Yes. Psychological research consistently shows that autonomy is the primary shield against workplace stress and burnout.
Autonomy meaning having agency over your own life, deciding how and when you tackle a problem.
Precisely. If a team of engineers is incredibly passionate about a project and they autonomously decide to pull a 12-hour self-determined sprint to get it over the finish line.
Where they control when they start, when they eat, how they collaborate.
Yes. That intense effort actually causes significantly less psychological distress than working a strictly regulated 8-hour shift where they are micromanaged, monitored, and treated like untrustworthy children.
That is fascinating.
The psychological burden that causes burnout isn't just about the raw volume of hours, it is heavily correlated with the lack of control. But the labor law only measures the hours. It is completely blind to autonomy.
But wait, if economists know time tracking is useless for knowledge work, and psychologists know autonomy is more important than raw hours for preventing burnout,
Hmm.
why did the European Court of Justice rule the way they did?
Ah, the lawyers.
Yeah, what do the lawyers know that the doctors and economists don't?
The legal system operates on an entirely different set of incentives. Lawyers and judges, in the context of labor disputes, do not care about the nonlinear economics of creative breakthroughs.
Right, they aren't managing the company's profit.
And they are not in the business of evaluating subjective psychological autonomy either. They care about one thing above all
Oh, no.
else: objective provability in a court of law.
Evidence.
Yes, evidence. If an employee sues the company for exploitation, a judge cannot adjudicate quote-unquote lack of autonomy or negative creative output easily. Those concepts are too abstract, too subjective.
You can't put lack of economy in a spreadsheet.
Exactly. But a second, a minute, an hour. Those are objective, standardized physical measurements. A judge can look at a timesheet and make a binary ruling. Yes, they worked over 8 hours, or no, they didn't.
So the legal system forces all human labor to be quantified in units of time, because time is the only metric the legal system knows how to reliably process.
Even if that measurement is a complete economic fiction in the real world.
This reveals a massive, deep-seated divide in how we understand work itself. The fundamental flaw in our legal framework is that it treats all labor as if it operates on the exact same physics.
It is absurd.
It assumes the assembly line, the software startup, and the hospital ward are all playing the same game.
That is the core of the societal mismatch. We need to clearly contrast these different worlds of work to see why the law fails so spectacularly. Let's look at linear industrial work versus what we can call purpose-driven or care work.
Okay.
In linear work, factory manufacturing, basic logistics, data entry time genuinely does equal output. And in those specific fields, strict time tracking laws actually do exactly what they were designed to do. They protect vulnerable physical laborers from being worked to death by a machine's pace.
They act as a necessary shield.
Right. Furthermore, the economics of linear work are fascinating. When wages go up in linear work, say, due to union demands, what does the employer naturally do?
They automate. I mean, if it costs too much to pay a human to stamp the car door, you just buy a robotic arm to do it.
Exactly. High wages in linear work drive technological automation, which historically has the ultimate effect of freeing humans from repetitive, soul-crushing drudgery.
But then you pivot and look at purpose-driven work. Let's talk about care work, nursing, elder care, social work, early childhood education. The rules of physics here are completely inverted.
100% inverted.
In care work, there is no machine pace. You cannot put a patient's recovery on a conveyor belt and speed it up by 15%.
No, you can't optimize human healing like a supply chain.
You cannot automate the complex empathy required to calm down a dementia patient in the middle of the night. The pace of the work isn't dictated by management. It's dictated by biological reality and human need. The work happens when the crisis happens.
And this brings us to a profound realization about how society values this labor.
It really does. Because think about the automation parallel. If society decided to pay nurses and care workers incredibly high wages, commensurate with the actual value they provide to keeping human beings alive, we wouldn't see massive automation.
Yeah.
We wouldn't suddenly have robot nurses replacing humans, because you fundamentally cannot automate complex human care.
Exactly. The technological substitution just isn't possible.
So what would happen? If we paid them highly, we would simply attract a massive, highly motivated, well-trained workforce.
Supply and demand.
Right. We wouldn't have understaffed wards desperately relying on illegal 14-hour shifts just to survive the night. We would have a robust ecosystem of professionals who could organically coordinate to meet the practical necessities of their patients, rather than stressing out about the arbitrary ticking of an HR clock.
It would be a self-regulating system of professionals.
But instead, by artificially keeping wages low in care work, we perpetuate a system where this absolutely essential, non-automatable labor is constantly precarious. We keep them alienated, understaffed, and then we force them to participate in this bureaucratic compliance theater just to keep their jobs.
It is a profound structural failure of both the market and the state. The law is trying to homogenize entirely different categories of human existence.
Okay, so if the diagnosis is clear that treating knowledge workers and care workers like 19th century factory hands is breaking the system, what is the proposed solution? How do we legally separate the people who genuinely need the strict time clock protection from the people who need the flexibility to do their jobs properly?
Well, there is a very clear legal mechanism for this, often referred to in labor discussions as the autonomy
Well,
status.
Hani says.
Yeah, it is somewhat conceptually similar to the model used in places like California, which categorizes employees as either exempt or non-exempt.
How exactly would an autonomy status work in Europe based on these debates?
The mechanism is straightforward. If you hold a position that requires a high degree of autonomy, meaning you largely control when, where, and how you execute your tasks, and your performance is evaluated entirely on the results you deliver rather than the time you spend at a desk.
He said you get a different set of rules.
Right. You would be legally exempt from the rigid daily time tracking mandates.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Like if I'm a senior graphic designer working remotely and I do my best creative work at 2 a.m., let me work at 2 a.m.
Right. If the client is happy, who cares?
Exactly. And let me sleep until noon. Why force me to pretend I'm working 9 to 5 just to satisfy a spreadsheet?
Under the autonomy status, you wouldn't have to. Now, you would still be governed by overarching macro-level health protection laws, for instance, legal frameworks that prevent chronic, months-long overwork or mandate minimum annual leave, but you would be completely freed from the daily stopwatch.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here because I could hear the counter-argument forming in my head from the sources.
Go for it.
If we create a legal loophole called autonomy status, aren't we just handing massive corporations a golden ticket for exploitation?
Ah, yes.
Won't companies like Amazon or Uber just instantly reclassify every single warehouse worker and delivery driver as an autonomous, results-based contractor tomorrow just to strip away their overtime pay and force them to work 90-hour weeks? Isn't the state entirely justified in being terrified of this?
You have just articulated the exact reason why the autonomy status has not been widely adopted. The state has a deep, dogmatic, and historically validated distrust of employers.
So it's about trust, or the lack thereof.
Yes, the fear of the gig economy loophole is the primary barrier. Lawmakers look the potential for abuse, the artificial labeling of highly controlled, low-wage workers as autonomous, and they panic.
Because they can't police it.
Right. Because the state is terrified of being unable to police that boundary, it refuses to create the autonomy status at all. Instead, it chooses the blunt instrument. It forces everyone, from the exploited gig worker to the highly compensated senior software architect, to write down their fictional 8 hours and 30 minutes.
The blunt instrument approach. Here is where the dynamic gets really fascinating for me. Because we've been talking about this on a macro, legal level, courts, governments, unions. But what happens when we zoom in?
Down to the office floor.
Yeah, what does this environment of compliance theater actually do to the psychology of a workplace? What happens to the culture of a company when every single person in the building knows the rules are fake?
It completely warps reality.
There is a brilliant comparison used in modern organizational critiques, contrasting a traditional handyman with a modern software developer, particularly in startup hubs like Berlin.
It is a devastating comparison that really illuminates the modern knowledge economy. Think about a traditional physical trade. Imagine you are a certified electrician. If you are hired to wire a house, and you do a poor job if you cut corners, or if you simply don't understand electrical engineering, what happens?
The house burns down, or someone gets electrocuted. The feedback loop is immediate, physical, and catastrophic.
Exactly. The physical reality of the job forces you to be competent. There is absolutely nowhere to hide bad work in a physical trade. Your incompetence will be revealed by reality itself.
But when you pivot to modern knowledge work, particularly in the tech and startup sectors, that physical reality simply doesn't exist. You are building invisible architecture.
It's all abstracted.
And instead of a culture of rigorous physical competence, you often find a pervasive culture of fake it till you make it. We see code not treated as a carefully crafted, durable structure, but as a disposable commodity.
It's just duct tape and string.
Right. It's just a minimum viable product spaghetti code rushed out the door as fast as possible, solely to impress investors and secure the next round of venture capital funding.
And this brings us to one of the most counterintuitive realities of modern corporate life. We usually assume that employees universally despise rigid bureaucratic processes.
Well, yeah, everyone complains about meetings and forms.
We think everyone hates filling out forms and attending pointless meetings, but when you look closely at these startup cultures, you realize something startling. Incompetent employees actually love rigid bureaucracy.
Wait, really? Why on earth would someone love bureaucracy? That sounds insane.
Because in a world without physical feedback loops, Rigid process culture becomes a highly effective substitute for real technical performance.
I'm not sure I follow.
Okay, under the guise of modern trendy management philosophies, frameworks like agile development or the Scrum methodology, people can perfectly simulate action without actually producing anything of value.
Hmm. Explain how that simulation works. How does Agile become a shield?
Think about the mechanics of Scrum. You have daily stand-up meetings, you have sprints, and most importantly, you have software tools like Jira.
Oh, Jira, the bane of my existence.
Right. Let's say you are a junior developer who has been promoted too fast. You don't actually understand the underlying back-end architecture of the application you are supposed to be building. You are completely out of your depth.
You're drowning.
In a physical trade, you'd be exposed instantly. But in this digital environment, what do? You focus entirely on the process.
The theater of it.
You make sure your Jira tickets are meticulously formatted. You speak the jargon perfectly in the morning meeting. You move the digital Post-it note from the to-do column to in progress to review.
You are gamifying the appearance of work. Moving the ticket gives you and your manager a little dopamine hit of productivity, even if the code attached to that ticket is absolute garbage.
Precisely. If you strictly adhere to the process and your automated timesheet perfectly reflects your 8.5 hours of compliance, you have constructed an impenetrable protective shield.
That's brilliant. Diabolical, but brilliant.
You cannot easily be fired for writing mediocre, unscalable code if your compliance paperwork is flawless, your tickets are updated, and you follow the agile process to the letter. The bureaucracy becomes the armor that hides the incompetence.
That is terrifying. It explains so much about why corporate software is often so incredibly broken, despite millions of dollars being poured into it.
The process becomes the product.
But it also completely reframes how we need to think about workplace stress. Because when we talk about burnout, the conversation is almost exclusively about hours. I'm working too much, I'm exhausted.
And that is a fundamental misdiagnosis of the primary pathology of modern knowledge work. The most destructive, soul-crushing form of stress in these environments isn't the raw volume of hours. It is the cognitive and emotional distress of incompetence.
It's imposter syndrome weaponized by the system.
Yes. It is the constant, latent, low-grade panic of building digital systems whose side effects you do not understand. It's the feeling of watching a house of cards get taller and taller with every sprint, knowing that the foundation is rotten, and just waiting for the day it inevitably collapses.
And the true tragedy here, from an economic and societal standpoint, is how this compliance theater systematically blocks real innovation. Think about the mental energy required to maintain this charade.
It's exhausting just pretending to work.
All the cognitive bandwidth that a worker should be putting into mastering their craft, learning a new programming language, or deeply understanding a complex problem is instead diverted into maintaining the illusion of productivity.
Yeah.
You aren't innovating. You are just doing performative admin to prove you are present.
It results in the methodical, systemic hollowing out of actual expertise within the organization. Nobody is actually getting better at their jobs.
Okay, but this raises a massive, glaring question for me. If people are so incredibly stressed out by this imposter syndrome, by the fear of the house of cards collapsing, and by the sheer mind-numbing boredom of participating in compliance theater, why don't they do something about it?
It's a great question.
Why don't they just put in the effort to learn the skills, become truly competent, or just quit and find a job that has real meaning? What is driving this desperate, widespread need to fake it?
To answer that, we have to pull the camera way back and look at the macroeconomic environment that surrounds these workers. The root cause of this individual's psychological stress is a pervasive societal financial anxiety.
Financial anxiety. How does that connect to faking a timesheet?
Deeply. The fear of an uncertain financial future suffocates the desire for productive expertise in the present. If you look at younger generations entering the workforce, they are looking at astronomical housing costs, inflation, and broken pension systems.
They can't afford a house. They can't afford to retire.
Exactly. So they aren't going to work with the mindset of the 1950s. They aren't trying to master a craft, build a 40-year career, and contribute to visionary capitalism. They are entering the workplace treating it as a temporary exhaustion scenario.
So they view the job as a hostile environment. They just need to survive.
They are gritting their teeth, hiding behind the Jira tickets, faking their timesheets, and enduring the profound stress of incompetence solely to extract enough capital to secure their retirement so they can eventually escape the system entirely.
Just extracting value to run away.
Right. Money is no longer operating as a glorious incentive for innovation. Money is operating as a vector of fear.
That is incredibly bleak. But to understand how the macroeconomy created this fear, there's a fascinating historical parallel we need to explore from the sources. It's a concept economists refer to as the wishing well theorem.
Ah, yes, the wishing well.
Break this down for us because it blew my mind when I first read about it. Take us back to World War II.
The wishing well theorem is crucial for understanding today's financial psychology. If we look back at the United States economy during and immediately after World War II, we see a highly unique situation. The domestic economy was producing at absolute maximum capacity to support the global war effort. Everyone was working, and unemployment was virtually zero.
A booming wartime economy.
However, domestic consumption was heavily restricted and rationed. You couldn't buy a new car because the steel was going to tanks. You couldn't easily buy appliances or nylon.
So people were earning all this money from the factory jobs, but they literally had nothing to spend it on. Their savings accounts were just swelling up.
Precisely. And government economists were petrified of this dynamic. They looked at these massive, bloated savings accounts and realized that the moment the war ended and rationing was lifted, all of that stored up cash would flood into the consumer market at the exact same time.
All that money chasing a limited supply of goods.
Exactly. The demand would instantly outstrip supply, and it would trigger catastrophic hyperinflation.
So how did they stop it? How did they fix the glitch?
They needed a way to soak up that excess money before it hit the market. They created what economists call a capital sink, a place to park wealth where it won't immediately chase consumer goods.
Okay, a capital sink.
During WWII, the primary capital sink was war bonds. The government aggressively marketed these bonds, telling citizens it was their patriotic duty to buy them. People poured their excess wages into these bonds, locking their money away for years.
And what was the macroeconomic result of doing that?
It worked perfectly. It absorbed the inflationary pressure, but it had an incredible unintended consequence. When those bonds eventually matured 5 or 10 years later, they slowly injected wealth back into the economy, fueling a post-war boom of incredible, real-world hyperproductivity.
Wow.
It funded the creation of the middle class, the housing boom, and massive infrastructural expansion.
Okay, I see exactly where this is going because obviously today we are not buying war bonds, but we have a modern equivalent. We have a massive amount of capital sloshing around the global economy, especially after years of low interest rates.
We do indeed.
But it's not being poured into real-world hyperproductivity. It's not building high-speed rail or solving the energy crisis. Where's all this excess wealth going?
It is being poured into the modern capital sink, the international financial markets, and specifically highly speculative assets like cryptocurrency, NFTs, and algorithmic day trading. These markets absorb the excess wealth of the professional class.
And this brings us to one of the most brilliant psychological parallels I have ever encountered. When you observe the behavior of the modern white-collar worker, there is a direct, undeniable correlation between the stress of incompetence at their day job and an obsession with day trading and crypto.
It is a striking, almost tragic paradox. Let's return to our tech worker hiding behind their JIRA tickets. They hate their job. They are dealing with legacy code they don't understand. They are trapped in the endless loop of compliance theater, and they feel a profound daily lack of control over their own lives.
They are miserable.
To escape this misery, they decide they need to get rich quick and achieve financial independence, retire early. So, what is their escape hatch? They turn to day trading crypto on their phones during their lunch break.
Which, if you think about it for more than 10 seconds, is absolute insanity. Because in day trading, they are willingly submitting themselves to highly stochastic, deeply manipulated global financial markets that they fundamentally do not understand.
They have zero edge in that market.
None. When I was processing this, it felt exactly like watching a friend try to escape a terrible, toxic, abusive marriage by immediately running off to Las Vegas and marrying a total stranger they met at a blackjack table.
That is a harsh but very accurate analogy.
You are not solving the anxiety. You are just trading one form of powerlessness for another. You trade the illusion of control at work, where you fake your timesheet to pretend you have mastery over your corporate time, for the illusion of control in the financial market, where you are reading crypto candlestick charts like they are astrology, pretending you can predict the future of global capital.
It is the exact same psychological mechanism seeking order in chaos, just applied to a different system. But what is truly vital to understand here is that this is not just a tragedy for the individual. This loop of anxiety and speculation serves a highly effective disciplinary function for the broader economic system.
Wait, hold on. A disciplinary function. That implies it makes them better workers. But if everyone is exhausted from faking their jobs and panicked about their crypto portfolios crashing, shouldn't that make them terrible, disruptive employees? How does adding financial panic make someone more disciplined?
It makes them disciplined because it ensures compliance. Think about it mechanically. Your financial anxiety about your speculative investments keeps you tied to your desk.
Because you need the safety net.
Yes. You cannot afford to lose your primary income stream because you need that paycheck to fund your escape plan, or, more likely, to cover the losses you just took in the market. So you sit quietly, you don't cause trouble, you don't demand structural reform, and you dutifully fill out your fake timesheet every Friday. The anxiety enforces the compliance theater. Furthermore, and this is the most insidious part, it completely absorbs systemic critique.
How does it absorb critique?
When a worker's day trades inevitably fail, or the crypto market crashes and wipes out their savings, who do they blame? They do not look up and blame the structural absurdity of a labor market that forced them into this desperate situation in the first place.
They don't look at the system.
No, they don't blame the 19th century labor laws or the hollowing out of corporate expertise. They blame themselves.
Ugh.
They say, I had weak hands, or I didn't research the coin enough, or I timed the market wrong. The system is perfectly designed to make you internalize the failure. It keeps you on the treadmill, blaming your own lack of speculative skill, rather than questioning the societal theater you are forced to perform in every day.
That is incredibly dark. So let's summarize the trap we are in right now. We have a society that is legally trapped in 19th century Taylorist labor laws. We have a workforce dealing with the psychological rot of process culture, hiding their incompetence behind agile bureaucracy.
Check and check.
And everyone is too financially terrified to actually build anything real, so they secretly gamble on their phones, hoping to win the lottery and escape. If this system is this broken, and it is making almost everyone involved absolutely miserable, why doesn't the political apparatus just fix it? Why are we having the exact same brain-dead debates about the 8-hour workday that we were having 25 years ago?
Because we are suffering from what sociologists call structural learning blockades. Society has lost the ability to process complex information and adapt.
We're just stuck in a loop.
We are trapped in a symbiotic loop of stagnation between two major institutional forces: the media ecosystem and the political system.
Okay, let's dissect those blockades. Let's start with the media.
Yeah.
Why is the media actively blocking our ability to learn and adapt to modern work?
Because the modern media ecosystem operates on a fundamental logic of maximum reduction and emotionalization. You simply cannot explain the nuanced structural paradox between linear factory work and autonomous knowledge work in a 3-minute cable news segment or a short tweet.
It's too complicated for a soundbite.
Exactly. The media requires a moral binary to generate outrage, which generates clicks and ratings. So they never frame the working time debate as a systemic issue with outdated, mismatched legal frameworks. They frame it entirely as a moral failing of individual.
Right. It's always a battle of cartoon villains. It's either greedy, exploitative billionaire bosses who want to crush the working class versus lazy, entitled Gen Z workers who just want to drink lattes and not work.
Exactly, because you can get angry at a lazy worker and you can get angry at a greedy boss. Anger drives engagement. You cannot get angry at the historical misapplication of Taylorist time motion studies to post-industrial cognitive labor. That doesn't make a good headline.
And because the media frames the debate that way, how does that infect the politicians? Why do they just endlessly repeat the same empty talking points?
Because politics today operates under the permanent, paralyzing threat of scandal. Imagine a reform-minded politician going on a Sunday talk show and genuinely trying to explain the autonomy status we discussed earlier.
Okay, picture that.
Imagine them saying, we should legally allow our top software developers and creative directors to work a 13-hour sprint if they choose to, because it aligns with their workflow. What happens next?
They get slaughtered. The political opposition clips that one sentence, hands it to the media, and the headline the next morning is, "Politician demands return to 19th century sweatshops, wants to abolish the 8-hour day."
It is absolute political suicide to suggest nuance. So, to survive the news cycle, both sides of the political spectrum retreat to completely safe, ritualistic talking points that they know won't cause a scandal.
So they just play their parts.
Yes. The conservative politicians demand pro-business flexibility without ever explaining how they will prevent the exploitation of gig workers. The progressive politicians demand strict worker protections and work-life balance without ever explaining how a modern tech infrastructure or a hospital is supposed to function under those rigid rules.
And the end result of this political cowardice is that the compliance theater works perfectly for the people at the top.
It serves them well.
The politicians can stand at a podium, bang their fists, and claim they have heroically defended the strongest labor laws in the world. The media have a perpetual, unsolvable crisis of burnout and labor disputes to report on forever. And meanwhile, the actual workers on the ground are still just logging into the HR portal and faking their 8.5 hours every Friday. It's a perfectly closed loop of dysfunction.
A closed loop where nothing ever learns and changes.
So how does it end? Does it end? What actually breaks this theater? Do we just have to wait for the entire corporate structure to collapse under the weight of its own bureaucracy?
Not necessarily. There's a concept from political science that offers a very specific historical mechanism for how entrenched systems like this change. It's known as the 3.5% rule, based heavily on the research of political scientist Eric Chenoweth.
The 3.5% rule, what does that mean?
Her research across historical movements shows that it does not take a majority or millions of people to force a rigid system to collapse or adapt. Historically, it only takes a focused, active, and sustained mobilization of about 3.5% of the population.
Just 3.5%. That's a tiny fraction.
It is, but, and this is the crucial caveat, it has to be the right 3.5%.
So who are the right people in this scenario? Because if professional activists haven't fixed labor laws yet, who can?
The system knows exactly how to handle and dismiss professional activists. They are priced into the model. The true vulnerability of the compliance theater lies with the people we can call the performers of practical constraints.
The competent people, the ones who actually keep physical and digital reality running.
Exactly. The ultimate system-breaking protest wouldn't involve holding signs in a town square or chanting slogans. Imagine a coordinated action by the highly competent people holding the fragile reality of our society together. Imagine if the nursing directors of major hospitals, the senior IT architects maintaining the banking infrastructure, and the construction foremen building the transit systems all walked up to the steps of Parliament.
A strike of the competent.
And instead of reading a list of political demands, they simply brought boxes of their actual raw data and dumped their fake timesheets on the ground.
Wow.
Imagine them looking at the politicians and saying, "Your law forces us to lie every single day just to keep reality running. We are done lying." If companies across the country simply stopped utilizing the software that pre-fills the magical 8.5 hours and instead sent the raw, messy, chaotic, truthful data of their actual working hours into the state's tracking systems?
Oh, man. The 14-hour emergency hospital shifts, the 3-hour creative lulls, the 11-hour server repair sprints.
Yes. If that raw truth hit the state apparatus, the sheer, staggering mass of formal legal violations would completely paralyze the government authorities in a matter of days.
They wouldn't know what to do with it.
They physically wouldn't have the manpower to process the fines or adjudicate the infractions. The bureaucratic system would choke to death on the actual truth of how work gets done.
It is incredible to think about the leverage those people have if they simply stop pretending. We started this deep dive looking at a simple, slightly annoying drop-down menu on a Friday afternoon timesheet. And by pulling on that thread, we've uncovered a society that is fundamentally structurally trapped.
We really are.
We have 21st century cognitive and care work being policed by 19th century factory laws. We have a corporate culture where profound incompetence hides behind the gamified armor of agile processes and JIRA tickets. We have a workforce driven by a financial anxiety so deep it pushes them to gamble on crypto just to dream of an escape from the boredom.
It's quite the picture.
And hovering above it all, we have a media and political class completely paralyzed, too terrified of nuance to actually fix any of it.
The layers of fiction we maintain, the cognitive dissonance we endure just to keep the lights on and avoid a scandal, are truly staggering.
So, to you listening,
Yeah.
the next time you sit down to your computer to log that perfectly uniform, mathematically flawless, completely fictional sequence of 8 hours and 30 minutes,
Yeah.
take a second.
Just pause.
Look at the blinking cursor. Recognize that you are not just doing tedious admin. You are actively participating in a grand societal piece of performance art.
And that leads directly to a final thought I'd like to leave you with, something to mull over when you finally close that HR portal today. The entire system we've discussed only survives because we, as individuals, quietly resolve its massive contradictions in private. We take the stress home with us so the corporate paperwork looks clean.
We absorb the shock.
We do. So, what would happen in your own workplace if, just for one single week, you and your colleagues refused to participate in the compliance theater? What if everyone documented the exact chaotic, inconvenient, totally illegal truth of how their work actually gets done? Would your organization's systems instantly collapse under the weight of that honesty? Or would it finally be forced to learn, adapt, and build a system based on reality?
That is a brilliant, slightly dangerous question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you. Keep looking for the truth hiding behind the perfectly formatted paperwork, and we'll catch you next time.